Hi, my name is Antonio Mauri, and I've been wanting to make this video for a long time because I'm somebody who has a lot of faith. I'm extremely Catholic. I go to Mass every day. I spent hours just trying to get closer to God. Every day I'm like working on my relationship with God, with Christ, but I was definitely not always like this. And I think even people who knew me from before, it's still kind of like shocking. And I think it's so interesting, everything that has to happen to someone to go from that point to where I am now. Honestly, some days I still can't believe the change, and I think people can't either. And it's not that I had like an extraordinary thing happen or my life was like radical in one sense and now I ended up here. But I think my life looked a lot like a normal life. And I think that's what's kind of the scary part. I think a lot of people can identify with how I was and who I was and who I am now. And so it's kind of weird making a video about my life and just things I've learned, but I think a lot of things and reflections can come out of it, and especially people who kind of can identify with it. So growing up, I was raised Catholic. My parents put us in Catholic school ever since I was a little kid. I went to St. Agnes Academy. And they gave us all the formation. I mean, I knew all the prayers, I knew the apostles, I knew the saints, we'd go to Mass every Sunday. I knew Our Father, the Hail Mary. So I knew like the practicality of it, but I think I never had that relationship with God and with Jesus. And so growing up, I had a lot of doubts, especially in high school and in college. I think that's when it got the worst. And so that's when I started living furthest away from God, from my faith. And I think it was because deep down I always had those doubts where I wasn't sure if it was true. So I think it was easier to do what I wanted. I think I had that attitude of, in case I'm wrong about this, let me not waste my life. The one life I have, let me have fun with it in case, this might not even be true. And I think I had a lot of doubts I just didn't look into. And so in high school, my dad and my sister were actually living in Mexico mostly because my sister was starting her singing career. She was putting out albums and she was doing music videos. And so my dad knew the industry. He had worked there his whole life in acting. So he was over there helping her and by her side. And so my mom would like come and go too. She wanted to see her husband and her daughter. But I had high school, so I had to stay in Miami. And I think, that liberty, it led me to misuse it a lot. But it got even worse when I got to college. Because in college, there's nobody to tell you what to do or when to do it. So in high school, I kind of got away with like not going to Mass on Sundays because my mom would go, but when she wasn't here, I didn't have to go. But I was living with Angelica, who's worked with the family 25 plus years. So, and she would actually get on my case the most about me not praying and not going to Mass, but I like brushed it off and I was just trying to do my own thing. But it got even worse when I got to college. And in college, I stopped going to Mass on Sundays altogether. I don't think I prayed once when I got to college, and my lifestyle got a lot worse. I started, started partying almost, every day, honestly. And I started partying every day, literally. I started, focusing on school and friends and social life and drinking and, trying new substances and getting caught up in the excitement of college. And so I still had these doubts, but I was acting so far from them. And it's curious because, looking back at that point, I had everything that you would think you would need to be happy. I had a family that loved me. I had friends. I had, financially, I was in the university I always wanted to go to. I was in USC. I was studying what I always wanted to study, which was business and acting. I got into the fraternity I always wanted to get into. But somehow, especially on weekends, I was still, when I would wake up, it was still like there was something missing. And it was interesting because I think this is when I was going through, I had some like episodes of depression, and it was kind of an unusual depression because it was just like things kind of lost their meaning. You know, I used to think like, oh, we're just going through cycles and we always want what's next, and it's just a series of like, you know, spending time. And I remember the summer before, I was blessed enough that we went to Europe, and we were on a boat in Europe with my family in the middle of the ocean. And I remember thinking like, I'm in Europe, like in a boat with my family, like we were partying. And I remember thinking, if I'm not happy here, when am I ever gonna be happy? What else do I need to be happy? And that was the scariest thought, thinking, I don't think there's anything that's gonna make me happy. And so I got back to USC, and I was going through school. And I remember one day, and I've always been someone who's very pragmatic and who's very functional and who's very intellectual. And so I remember one day I called my mom, and I remember saying, Mom, I'm so sorry. I know you and Dad and the whole family's Catholic, but I'm not. I think that's when I reached like the most doubts I ever had. One of my roommates used to be Muslim, and he had left his faith. And my other roommate was studying to be a doctor, so a lot of science. Shout out to them too. Love you guys. And I think that's why we clicked so much, because I was too. I was very like science, and we would talk about like psychology and like physics, and he was doing, you know, I remember OChem, and so we identified a lot. But I remember I called my mom, and I was like, Mom, I remember telling my mom, I know you guys are Catholic, but I'm not. I remember my mom was super understanding. She was like, you know, Toño, they call me Toño. She was like, Toño, I think that this is something you have to go through, and you know, it's kind of your journey. So they were very respectful. But she said one thing, she was like, just please come with us this summer to Medjugorje. Medjugorje is this small city in Bosnia and Herzegovina where there are apparitions of the Virgin Mary. And the Virgin Mary chose these group of kids ever since they were kids, and now they're grown adults. But and she chose them, and she gives them messages that she brings from God and from Christ. And so, I mean, I had heard about this place, and I mean, of course I wanted to go. I definitely wanted to know the truth, you know, what is really going on. So, you know, as like the scientific kind of mindset approach that I had, I was like, okay, yeah, let's kind of investigate it. And I figured like if there's any place in the world that where I'm most likely to kind of have an encounter and see what's going on, like it's it's got to be Medjugorje, right? So I went that summer with my family, and it's crazy because so many things happen in Medjugorje that have no explanation. Especially for me, you know, I saw things, I heard things, I smelled things, I felt things. I left felt at the end because I know how it sounds. Like it doesn't sound very scientific, but when you feel it, you feel it. And it's crazy because being there were so many things that, with the rationality that I had about the world, I couldn't explain. And despite all the things that I saw, that I heard, that I couldn't explain, it still wasn't enough. It took me 3 times going to Medjugorje to finally say there's something going on here that I can't deny. But I went to Medjugorje, and then I came back to college, and I was excited because it did create something. Like I think we went twice that summer, and something happened that I just couldn't explain. There was like a movement going on. But of course, like I sat down, I told my roommates about everything I was feeling. And I think just naturally, like we would talk about it, and then more doubts came up, right? But if God does this, and then this, why that, and why this? And it's interesting because I never wanted them to know that I had those doubts. I wanted to seem like I was so firm in my faith. So I'd go back into my room and like, all right, good night, guys. But that's when I would kind of go through this motion of, what if they're right? I can't explain that. That's a great point. I hadn't thought about that. It mixed with the doubts I already had. So I was kind of going through it. But one day, everything changed in the fraternity when I encountered my first real super passionate Christian. So one day I remember being in the fraternity, and I remember this Christian came into the fraternity with a Bible, and he was telling people like, hey, he was just inviting people to come read the Bible with him. And I don't know if it was because, like walking into a fraternity house where you know that what you're there to preach and talk about is probably not the main topic that people want to talk about, and know that you're probably going to get backlash and negativity, but to do it anyway, I think that was one of the bravest things I've ever seen. And so when we interacted, I told him I was super interested in reading it. And I mean, I had these doubts, so I wanted to look into it. And I did, and I started hanging out with him. They were non-denominational Christians, so not Catholic, but we both have Christ as the cornerstone. So we started reading the Bible, and I mean, we did it for a long time. I actually started, I kind of left the church. I started hanging out with him. I started going to church instead of mass. I started, there were certain things I stopped doing. I started doing, following them more and what they would do. And everything was going great. I remember one day we got coffee with their pastor, and then we started talking about all the things that were wrong with the Catholic Church. And back then, I mean, I didn't have any, formation, or I didn't know why I believed the things I believed. And back then, I knew what Catholics believed, but I didn't know why we believed them. So at that point, I was definitely really confused, but not so much in that I was thinking of leaving the church and exploring other denominations, but to the point that once again, I didn't know if I even believed in God. So I already had these doubts, and then now I had more doubts, and so I went back to square one. And I remember sometime after I was walking home, and I remember I did this prayer that I think we don't do, and I think it's super important. And I remember I was walking home, I was on the street, and I remember asking God for help. I remember, with literally tears in my eyes, saying, God, I need your help, because I'm about to walk away and I'm never coming back. I have too many questions, and I just don't understand. But if this is true, if you're here, if you love me, if we were made to have a relationship, if what you did on that cross is true, and you did that for me because you love me, God, I want you in my life. But I can't do it alone, and I don't even know where to start, and I'm about to walk away, so it's gotta be, so it's now or never. And that day, there was this friend that people were telling me to meet, and we hadn't met. We were trying to arrange it, and for some reason that day we could meet. And at the end of the lunch, he looks at me and he's like, Antonio, he didn't know what I was going through, but he told me, he's like, Antonio, don't you ever let people tell you that God's not real. It's true, he's real, and Jesus is real, and Jesus loves us. And man, it was like such a beautiful moment. And I remember sitting there like, okay, he didn't know what I was going through. And so, I mean, it's not that that's where I converted, but it was one of those little moments where it's so obvious that God's listening. When I finally came to believe that God was real and that he was listening, was when there were so many coincidences that it was obvious that they weren't coincidences anymore, that he was listening, that he was actually answering. And so I remember I came home and super confused, but I remember saying, you know what, I have to figure this out for myself. And so I remember for the first time I started reading the Bible by myself. I started praying, just talking to God. I started praying the rosary. I went to confession. I went to mass again. I was blessed enough that I had done my first communion, so I could receive the Eucharist. And so I went back to receiving the Eucharist. And so also the pragmatic kind of side of me came out too. And I treated it like an experiment. And I remember saying, I don't remember if it was 1 month or 2 months, but I remember saying, for a period of time, there's certain things I have to stop doing. There's certain things I have to stop seeing and drinking. And there's certain friendships that I'm not gonna be able to probably hang out with for a little bit, but I'm gonna see what happens if I actually dedicate my time to this, make it the priority, and live how God asks us to live. And man, I don't know if it was during the prayers, definitely during the Mass, but something changed. And the more the more I learned about it, the more I wanted to learn. God started answering some of those questions that I had. Why would God allow this? Why should we think this? And He started answering them one by one. And it's interesting because, I mean, I had everything you would think you need to be happy, and it wasn't working. And now for the first time ever, I was so happy. I had so much peace. And even my perspective started to change, and it's what they say, like the truth will set you free. I felt like free from certain things. I was like in control. And so around that time is right when I left USC to start working. I did Herederos por Accidente in Mexico. We filmed the pilot for mariachis, which that story is really cool too, maybe for a different video. But when I wasn't sure if I should be acting or school or what I should be doing, I did a prayer too. And I remember saying, God, if you want me to be an actor, if I can serve you as an actor, then open the door and I'll follow it. But only if you want me to. And I remember I made that prayer, and then within 5 days, I had 3 job opportunities lined up. And I think sometimes God just needs us to give everything, right? To commit to Him and trust that He'll make the way. After that, after I started acting and producing, we came back to Miami, we came back to the States, and that's when March of 2020, COVID got out of control. So after COVID hits, I'm in Miami with my family, and that's when everything changed, because I had gotten here with like that like spirit in me, that fire, but I didn't know how to like translate it to my family, and I didn't want to feel like I was like forcing them. So I'd say like, all right, I'm gonna go pray, guys, but like no pressure. And thankfully my sister, she's definitely got more of a spark, more of a spice. And she was like, no, we're all gonna pray. And because my sister, I mean, she had a crazy conversion too. But this is like when my sister and I would talk a lot about the Bible and what I was learning and concepts that we hadn't thought about. So Carla was also kind of going through this thing too now. And she kind of helped me bring it on to my parents. And so we have these cousins that are extremely Catholic. They have a Catholic network called Maria Visión. And they've always been the example, honestly. Even when I didn't believe, I held them to such a regard that I always thought, what would they think? And their opinion has always mattered a lot. And they're the ones that introduced us to everything. They're the ones that taught us, the theology we knew and things like that. And so now that we were here, and so one day at the house, they told us about the consecration to the Virgin Mary. I still had a lot of doubts, so at first, I didn't know how that sounded, but once I understood why, and this concept of like to Jesus through Mary, and also I don't know what happened in that moment, but I think it was like a grace, but I knew it was the right thing to do, and it gave me so much peace. And so we did the consecration to Mary, which means we're doing rosaries every day, watching the Mass, because that's when all the churches were closed, which is crazy. And so we did the consecration, and as a family, things started to change. Like now we were praying together. And for me personally, this is probably when the biggest shift happened, because I think when I was, still in college, kind of going through the change, there were certain things that I wasn't doing anymore, but because I understood that God was asking me not to do them. But I still missed parties and partying. I still missed alcohol. I still missed, all those things. But I didn't do them because I knew, we were asked not to. But this is where my heart, I think, changed, because I didn't want to do them anymore. I understood how the world worked, how destructive they were, like the consequence of sin. And I think just like the wisdom that comes from God, to be able to see these things in motion, to be able to see just the world from a different perspective. And that's when this thing happened, which is, if you've ever experienced someone who's like going through a conversion, it's probably the point where you're like, whoa. But it's because when you first feel the love of God for real, there is nothing like that you've ever felt in your life before. That's the point where people will quit their jobs, they'll leave their countries, their families, they'll give up everything. And it's because it's hard to explain until you felt it, but it's the strongest kind of form of love you've ever felt in your life. Like nothing else matters. You don't matter, your belongings don't matter, like that matters. And it's hard to explain. And I think for me, I didn't even know what I was feeling. It was just, but I knew I was feeling it. And so, when I started believing in God, I didn't jump to Catholicism right away. I had to go through, step number one was, do I even believe in God? And that's definitely a video for another time because it's really long. But the first thing that was the most important was like being able to be amazed again, like at the world, at the fact that we live in a planet in space, in the galaxy, in life that, like that comes from a mom, I just like letting myself be impressed and shocked again. And I think this was the point where I was learning and I was still, researching things and asking priests and why would God allow this and why believe this? And this is the point where I started to say, okay, I understand now. But we were already doing that. We were watching the Mass. We were watching the Blessed Sacrament on TV, on YouTube, and on Maria Visión. But what came next was like the real test of faith, and it was putting it in practice. So in June of 2020, my family and I got COVID. And for the most part, we were okay. But my dad, he got it really bad. And it went to his lungs. And we were at home. And he got worse and worse and worse. And he couldn't breathe. And so he had to go to the hospital. And after being in the hospital for like a week or two, he had to actually be intubated and put in a coma. He spent 4 months in a coma. He spent 8 months total in the hospital. He spent 6 months in Miami and then a couple more in Gainesville. He had a double lung transplant. It's a miracle that he's alive. And so, when he goes in, immediately my family and I just pray. We prayed every minute of the day. From one rosary from rosaries to the Bible to the Blessed Sacrament to more rosaries to, at the beginning, we prayed every minute of the day. And we opened the door, we opened our hearts to let God in. And that was the real test of faith, because it's one thing to learn about having faith and reading about how God will be with you through the storm, through the shadows. But it's a whole other thing to be there and to have to trust, have to have faith. And it's so obvious to me that it was the Holy Spirit. It was, I don't know where we got that faith from. It's clear that it was God, that He was here, that peace, that comfort that we felt came from Him. And there were like 4 or 5 times where the doctors told us, that my dad wouldn't make it through the next couple of hours. And every time that happened, I remember we would say, that's not up to them. That's up to God. God's the one that decides. And when you go through spurts of 8 months or 6 months with him in the hospital, and every day is like, it's a roller coaster. I remember my sister said something that was so beautiful, because there comes a point where you've prayed, you've had faith, and I remember I had this one little breakdown where I thought, like, God, what more do you want me to do? Like, I've done it. I'm here. I've trusted. I have faith. Why isn't it working? And my sister Carla said something that was so beautiful. She said, guys, every day that he's in there, she said, nobody loves Dad more than God. And every day that God allows him to be in there is because He loves him. We don't understand it. And I think that's what having faith is. It's not just like believing, nonsensely. For me, it's having faith in a God that's good. And that's the one thing you can't lose. That's the first lie that the devil convinces Adam and Eve of, is that God isn't just, that He's lying to them. That's the oldest trick in the book. Having faith is believing that God is good, always. And I mean, and there's something about a doctor telling you, you know, I have no idea how he's here. Like, he shouldn't be here. And even them being impressed and shocked at how things just changed for no reason. And it was so humbling and so beautiful to have lived through that. And I think after that is really when our faith kind of took off. You know, we seeing that God was in control of everything, that he loves us, that the power of prayer, because I had never had to endure that. But I remember, you know, I was seeing other people that were praying for him and doing cadenas de oración, spreading it around, that were praying for him. And I remember thinking, God has to hear this. Like, the God of love, the God who told us, you know, ask and you shall receive. Like, you know, just seeing so many people pray for him, I remember thinking, he has to hear this. And he did. You know, after you felt that kind of peace, that kind of love, I mean, there's really no choice, you know, like that. You never want to stop feeling that ever again. And I think that, you know, there's definitely a different video of all the things we learned through this experience, but you know, your perspective changes too, because I mean, at least for me, the biggest thing was realizing that today could be my last day. For my dad, everything changed in 5 minutes. So, you know, especially at my age, but I think we all tend to plan like 20 years ahead, 30 years ahead, 5 years ahead, but nobody guarantees you have that time. So how you view the world, how you want to spend your last day, and you know, if there's a heaven, if there's, you know, something after, where do you want to go and how you want to get there? And love, you know, why wait until you die to get to know God? Like, starting now. And the more I research, the more I understand, the more questions I have, the more I get this depth, and the happier I am. And I think it's clear to me now that, you know, we were made to have a relationship with God. And when we don't have one, that's when we look for things to fill it. That's when we look for things to, that's when we look for things to kind of fill the void a little bit, but it's like a puzzle piece. And without him, there's really no way to do it. And so when I meet people who have doubts, who have questions, who have objections, I mean, I've had every single one of those. So I completely understand. I never judge. The opposite. I want to help, because I think, you know, I'm definitely not an apologist, someone who knows, who studies, who prepares themselves to answer all the questions and knows the resources and knows the facts and knows the argument. I mean, I'm not, but I mean, from my experience, I think there's a lot of reflections and things that my mind had to change on. And I think I can always offer like some insight. So I love like always talking about this and kind of sharing what I've learned. And you know, it's crazy, all the miracles, all the things that have to happen for someone to go from one extreme to another. And it's so humbling for me, because, you know, I talk to my family a lot about this, where I say, you know, I can't believe all the things that God has done through us, through me, considering that I was the one that didn't believe. Like, how did I go from being the one in the family who didn't believe to being the one that, you know, God chose to be the first one to have this encounter to kind of spark the flame. But, you know, when you look back, you realize it isn't you. You can't even take credit for it. It's all God. But that's why I'm here. I'm happy to, you know, keep putting stuff out, maybe things people hadn't considered. You know, I get what it is to think, to say like, yeah, I'm happy, you know, I have everything I need. But you've never felt happiness like this. And if, I mean, it makes sense. If this is what we were created for, to have this relationship, when you have it, it changes everything. But anyway, I hope to be making more of these videos, and, you know, from the one who feels like the last fish, going after every last fish left. Thank you so much. I mean, I hope this helps. Love you guys. Thank you. God bless. And, you know, if this sparks a question, or you have one, or you just want to talk about it, or you disagree with something, we don't have to agree. I'm always super down to talk about it and dialogue it. So thank you so much, guys. Appreciate you. I don't know, maybe you identify with who I was, who I am. Maybe you have some conversion story too, something that's happened in your life. Don't ignore it. Maybe you have your Medjugorje too, that you can't dismiss it. There's something about that you can't explain. Look into it. There's nothing to lose and everything to gain.